Welcome back to the Monday Report. Shortly, we'll be crossing over to the Catholic University where the Citizen TV Town Hall will be taking place. Today, the discussion is about graft and how it affects you, bearing in mind a very important issue in this country. Transparency International recently ranked Kenya at position 144 out of 180. And of course, that ranking assigned that graft was getting worse, not better, in this country. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to ask you, one, how does graft affect you personally? But second of all, what do you think needs to be done to deal with it? Now, we spoke to Kenyans from across the country to get their thoughts on this. And let's briefly understand what they have to say. We begin in Bungoma. Let's listen to this gentleman.
Imeni affect kwa sababu sina pesa hata kwa mfuko saa hizi. Penye natembea nikifanya kazi hakuna, ama nikienda mahali ati nipewe kazi, watu wanataka at least tutoe kitu. Hata umeona kwa hizi, waje niongelee sasa hizi kaunti zetu. Ukienda mahali ati unataka kukupe contract fulani, hawezi kupea kwa sababu wanataka utoe kiinua mkongo. Kama ningekuwa Uhuru Kenyatta saa hizi president wetu, mtu yeyote ambaye anapatikana na ufisadi saa hizi vile tumeona watu wengi, nikija nifanya ningemfuta kazi ama a step aside, investigation iendelee, ama huyu mtu apelekwe kotini, wamfunge na arudishe mali yetu.
Very honest thoughts from that gentleman in Bungoma County. Let's now cross over to Kitui County and listen to what some of the residents there had to say.
Sasa kama kiongozi wetu, president wetu wa Kenya, Uhuru, anafaa kuchukulia hawa watu wale wako na hii corruption, anafaa kuwachukulia hatia. Juu sisi kama watu tunaumia.
Tunasikia watu wameimba pesa na wakiimba wanapelekwa mbele, na sasa mwisho hatuoni wakirudisha hizo pesa ili ziletwe huko chini tusipate. Tunalilia president wetu Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta atusaidie ili mtu akipatwa tumuone akipelekwa na arudishe mali yenye ameimba.
Well, the voices of the women of Kitui County. Two quick tweets before we cross over to the town hall. Let me see here. Oyondi Malik says the guilty ones are afraid with the way the investigating arms are on top of their game. May the plunderers be brought to book. And last one here. Murimi Stephen, he expects fair, unbiased and speedy prosecution of suspects and the eventual recovery of looted properties. And I'll be reading a few more a bit later on. But for now, let me take you over to Trevor Ombija and his panel. They're on standby to have that discussion. Start tweeting, keep tweeting. And of course, 2242 is the SMS line. Trevor Ombija, over to you at Catholic University.
Thanks, Wahiga. Live from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Tonight, we tackle the elephant in the room, corruption. Has the fight against graft been weaponized and the barrel stand against an individual? Is the backpassing and name-calling a deterrent in the fight against graft? We have the stakeholders here. We'll find out the answers from them. But Mashirima pia yuko hapa nami. Mashirima, mambo vipi?
Kama kawaida mambo poa, kwa wengine wanahisi mambo poa zaidi wakati huu ambapo ufisadi unapigwa vita, lakini kuna wengine wanaona kuwa si vita dhidi ya ufisadi, wengine wanaona ni vitimbi tu. Wako wananchi hapa kutoka sehemu mbalimbali humu nchini watakuwa tu wanatuelezea kauli zao kuhusiana na jinsi wanavyoona vita hivi dhidi ya ufisadi vinavyoenda. Baadaye Trevor.
Haya basi tutasikia kauli zao hivi very shortly. Kiswahili imeishia hapo. So I'll introduce my panelists, beginning from the farthest end. John Gidongo, CEO in Nuka Limited and also an anti-graft crusader, followed by Steve Ogola, an advocate. Thank you for making time. And Dorcas Oduor, Secretary Public Prosecutions. Thank you for making time as well. And Vincent Okongo, Director Preventive Services at the EACC. Let's get straight into it. And Vincent, I'll start with you. What do you think is ailing the war against graft? Or is it even ailing at all in your own assessment?
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you for inviting us to come and share our views in this particular forum. I think corruption is an entrenched thing in our society, and now it's been politicized and ethnicized at various quarters. From where I sit, a research that was done by the EACC in 2017 showed that 74% of Kenyans think the level of corruption is high. But what was also shocking is that over 60% are ready and willing to engage in corruption should the opportunity present itself. So that is one area we need to keep count on. Yeah. The second thing is that those who are trusted with public offices to protect public resources are not doing enough to ensure that those resources are put to good use. Here I'm talking about accounting officers in various government departments and agencies, CEOs of state corporations and others. They are not doing their job well, and that is creating and enhancing the problem of corruption.
All right.
Thirdly, is the whole question of the sting on corruption has not been felt in this country. The kind of convictions or decisions that are coming from our judicial system is sort of not discouraging the scourge of corruption. And I think that is contributing to this problem fundamentally.
Okay. Madam Dorcas, what do you make of it? Because he says the sting of corruption is not being felt, and more than 60% of Kenyans are willing to indulge in corruption. Is that a failure on the institution's part? And this is a multifaceted institution. There's the DPP, EACC, DCI, Judiciary. Is it an institutional failure?
No, it is not an institutional failure. Why? Because corruption is a process. It's not an end in itself. And your question was, what is the missing link?
Yeah.
Or
what is ailing the
what is
fight
ailing
against
corruption?
Yeah.
Personally, I speak from a prosecutor's point of view, and I think that the resolve of Kenyans, that a time has come that we must call it by its name, not camouflage it or nickname it, and the resolve of Kenyans that we must work together and support the institutions that fight corruption, and the resolve of Kenyans that corruption cannot be fought at the dead end. It starts from our houses, our churches, our institutions, and unless we demand accountability, integrity, and transparency from our houses, our institutions, our schools, from our leaders, that is when we can fight corruption. So the missing link is all of us, and our resolve that a time has come that we must make an about turn and call it by its name and fight it with the vigor that it deserves.
But there are those who are charged with fighting corruption, like yourselves, for example, the office of the DPP.
The responsibility is for everybody. And if I may tell you, the Director of Public Prosecutions, apart from the powers that have been donated to him by the Constitution, like any other Kenyan, has a duty and a responsibility to deter, detect, prevent, and dissuade criminal activity. It is only when deterrence and dissuasion fails that the DPP has to prosecute. And even when he has to prosecute, he has to do it robustly and must tenaciously adhere to the rule of law.
Right.
He has to be fair and he has to be independent.
Okay.
And at the same time, when he does that, we rely on other arms of government and rely on the citizens. Like the people who are watching today, all of us who are here, you are our suspects, you are our witnesses, you are our victims, you are our complainants. So it is the Kenyans. The DPP follows the evidence where it goes, and it is the Kenyans to bring that evidence.
Okay.
So you cannot refer to the DPP as dealing with corruption only. We deal with all criminal cases in all courts. It's only that we cannot work in isolation. We have to work in accordance with the strategic plan and the policy of the government.
Okay.
And for now, corruption has been flagged as a scourge, and we have to put a lot of effort in it, not that we forget other areas like drug trafficking, human trafficking, terrorism, defilement, rape. All those we deal with.
All right, Steve, let me bring you in on this. And there's been allegations that the judiciary is actually the weakest link. Do you agree?
Of course, I reject that as false. But in terms of governance, corruption, Trevor, is best fought at the ballot. But how can we fight graft when Kenyans have a settled determination to elect thieves and thugs and are fully committed to politics of ethnic solidarity? That if you're implicated in graft, the next place of the next port of call is the electorate. You come back in public office. You know, the Constitution seeks to inspire a new philosophy. You know, openness, transparency, accountability in terms of governance. But whom do you elect? You elect people that are not close to the ideals that the Constitution has sought to inspire. So it frustrates the war on graft. Because I want Kenyans to understand that corruption in the first instance must be fought at the ballot. And you can't go around about that. The second instance, corruption is fought through political accountability. Political accountability must be contradistinguished from criminal culpability, which is properly remitted to the DPP. Political accountability means, under Article 131, sub-Article 3 of the Constitution mandates the President to direct the functions of ministries and departments. He can fire I mean, don't be high on rhetoric, telling us how you have an aggressive posture on the war on graft, but you're low on action. I want Kenyans to know that, you know, reframing the war on graft to burden the DPP, to burden ESCC, is not going to get us very far. To shift the blame to the judiciary, I mean, really, corruption is a buzzword. Is that in court? Is just another offense being prosecuted in the usual manner? Kenyans must first of all bear the blame. If you elect people who are not close to the ideals that the Constitution seeks to inspire and influence, you will get an administration that is less than enthusiastic about fighting graft. If you elect people in those offices who are fully committed to transparency and accountability, they will fire. Once you're implicated, you're fired to preserve the perception. Because again, the war on graft is framed based on evidence, but also it's a question of perception. If people perceive you to be incapable and incompetent as to be able to discharge the functions of your office, you step aside, you pave way for another person. But in this country, the idea that people can even resign after they've been implicated, I mean, that's a long call. You get? That is where the problem is.
We'll come to the stinging actions later on, but John, what is your assessment of the fight against corruption? What do you think is ailing that particular fight and the agenda against corruption?
Well, I think I agree with what Steve, I mean, with the general sentiments that Steve has expressed. And, you know, if you look at the institutions represented by Dorcas and Vincent, Kenya has got the most sophisticated legal and institutional infrastructure for fighting corruption, I think, in most of sub-Saharan Africa. We have some of the best laws. If you look at the report done by the Attorney General, and he had a joint sort of task force in 2015 that produced a really classic document about the legal and institutional infrastructure for fighting corruption in Kenya. Yet, the better the infrastructure, the worse the corruption. And I distinguish between corruption. A lot of what we are seeing and reading, even the newspaper, these billions going here, being lost, misplaced, is theft. It's outright theft. And I disagree with blaming Kenyans, you know, saying the poor Kenyan, this theft and corruption arrives to them as extortion, where you are given a choice of tow a 50 bob or spend 3 days in a cell. You know, so for the poor, really, people, the choices. You go to hospital, you need treatment. A pregnant woman needs a scan. She's being asked for money. So that's in a different category. The problem we have is essentially a leadership that has taken over the language of fighting corruption that used to be used by media and civil society, and now regurgitates it back to wananchi. And so we see a lot of action by good people, you know, good people in different departments, who clearly are not empowered. Now, I'll just end by pointing, just giving an example of another African country, which is almost as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than Kenya, in terms of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, is Cameroon. It's always near the bottom, 25% of the world's most corrupt countries. In 2006, they launched Operation Sparrowhawk. You know, very focused. You know, a sparrowhawk is a very fast bird. It comes from high, it grabs what it wants even from your hand and takes off before you can touch it. So Operation Sparrowhawk has arrested more ministers and heads of public corporations than in any other country in the whole of West Africa. Yet, it is recognized by the population that this is a pantomime, a theater, you know, a game, that the real theft continues by the people who appointed Sparrowhawk itself. I think that's the condition we're in. Those who shout loudest are the biggest thieves.
All right. And Mashirima, the Kenyans themselves are here. Are they to blame? Do they agree?
Let's start with Sheila. Nadhani swali lake linahusiana na zile changamoto ambazo zilipo katika vita dhidi ya ufisadi. Simama tafadhali. Anza kutueleza swali lako ni lipi na jina lako.
My name is Sheila Waso. I'm from Embakasi. My question goes to Steve Ogolla. And my question is, does the law aid in corruption? And a case in point is when a corrupt fella discloses to a lawyer that he's guilty, for instance, but the lawyer, because of the confidentiality clause, cannot be able to actually disclose it for prosecution. Thank you. Steve?
Well, I think, let me tell you from a legal perspective. Kenyans must understand that the mind of a criminal defense attorney is that no one is to accuse himself except before the Lord. So he who accuses must establish. And as a defense attorney, my work is to walk you through the legal safeguards and let the DPP establish their case within the procedural safeguards. So if the DPP vacates procedural safeguards, of course I'll raise it as a question of procedure, and that will slow down the prosecution. And that's why I've said Kenyans must be given the proper frame or the proper lenses and combine. And I agree with John Gidongo in what he's saying, that the aggressive posture on the own graft is misplaced. It's not targeting the core where corruption is located. He's used the phrase that corruption arrives to you as extortion, and I like that. You know, I was telling, I think off the panel, offset, I was telling my colleagues that technically it's possible to arrest and arraign the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice, the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, the Deputy President William Ruto, you know, Speaker National Assembly Justin Muturi, and Speaker Senate Kenneth Lusaka. But in reality, can you arrest and arraign all these people without the government collapsing? Is it possible? And that's why they know it's not possible. So corruption continues on our bed because we don't have a shared and settled moral and ethical conviction of what is right and wrong. In short, there is a serious disjunction between what the law intends to inspire and the culture of bad manners which dominated our governance sector pre-2010. So we are trying to manage expectations. You know, presenting an aggressive posture, but underneath, corruption is going unabated. Ask yourself, why are new scandals emerging despite this aggressive posture? Why? I mean, even tonight and even tomorrow morning, we might read of new scandals. So that is where the location of the one graft should be, if you ask me. But insofar as the judicial process is concerned, it's a very limited, distant third option when you're fighting graft.
You don't want to jump in on this, and then any of the panelists can come in as well.
Sorry, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
And one of the complaints I've had in the fight against corruption over the last 25 years is that we've had too many lawyers in the fight against corruption. So we legalize it, which is good, but we sometimes don't acknowledge the fact that essentially once the legal and institutional instruments fail, it's the politics that is important. But the question that Sheila asks is important. It's a question being asked around the world right now. We have legislation in Kenya that is supposed to reveal, that is supposed to follow money. That banks are supposed to report when there are suspicious transactions. However, there is I would not call it a black hole, but a major problem, and this is a global money laundering and corruption problem of the lawyer's client's account. Because what has been found is that billions of dollars have been used to buy properties, even in the most developed countries in the world, in the UK and others, corrupt monies that pass through this particular black hole of the lawyer's client account, which doesn't seem to be very easy even for central banks and other competent authorities to have access to in a systematic manner that allows them to be able to deal with grand theft.
I'd like to hear what the Office of the DPP thinks about that, Madam Rokas, and then also EACC very briefly.
I think the question was, is the law a loophole in the fight against corruption? And I'll give you 3 instances. The first one is the lawyers in Kenya have refused to be reporting institutions with regard to money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism.
They have refused?
Because a bill was tabled before Parliament and it was shot down. And as far as I'm concerned, they are now trying to come up with some guidelines that are not anchored in law. All over the world, lawyers have been found to be a very critical part in the transactions with regard to money and businesses. And they deal with a lot of money and deal with a lot of companies, and therefore there is a need for them to be reporting institutions for purposes of transparency. But they are using confidentiality as a block, so that they are not detected, or they don't disclose the sources of money of their clients, and that is a weak link. The other weak link is the people who use the anti-corruption legislation, constitutional office holders who cannot step aside and argue that the Anti-Corruption Act allows them to stay in office until they are removed according to the provisions of the Act, which is wrong, because according to the Constitution, apart from being state officers, they are also public officers, so they should step aside just as public officers step aside. The other one is where there are no guidelines. For example, when it comes to disclosure of evidence in court, we are supposed to disclose to accused persons and to the court and to the defense. However, there are no guidelines. So advocates have taken advantage of that, requiring the DPP to bring in hard copies all documents that can be like 3 lorries in one case in hard copies. And those are loopholes that are being exploited by the Defense Counsel. Another one is the use of judicial review and constitutional petitions, ex parte applications that confer stays on them, endless stays that are not aborted, and those are loopholes that are being exploited by accused persons and defense.
So how can this be sorted out in your view, Vincent?
I think lawyers stand indicted when it comes to issue of hiding corrupt money. When corruption is in the offing, the lawyers who aid and abet the corrupt. And this is very serious. Following the money approach, the ESCC is now able to establish where money has gone, whether it's kept in cash or in other assets. We're able to identify those ones. So through asset recovery and investigation, we're able to clearly determine who are hiding these kind of resources. And we can confirm here that lawyers are a big letdown when it comes to this particular issue, and we need to address it. In fact, I would propose that a law be put in place to compel lawyers to disclose these monies their clients keep when the money is suspiciously acquired or earned.
Steve is vehemently shaking his head, but very briefly,
Trevor,
because we need to go back to Mashirima.
I don't want to lose the public, but let me just clarify something. In terms of the war on graft, insofar as judicial processes are concerned, I am yet to see procedures that are big lawyers innovating outside known procedures. If someone is probably filing a judicial review application, it's a procedure anchored in the law.
And that's what they're saying, that is a loop.
It means, what it means, let me explain to the public. It means that there's reason to believe that the decision, the legality of the decision to charge was not well founded. And it's open to every Kenyan to test that legality within the procedures. The judicial process is complex. And I want to de-emphasize, I've already de-emphasized litigation as a strategy for fighting graft. I just want to de-emphasize that. I'm allowed to de-emphasize that. Because once you are in court, I will read the law. For instance, Article 50, Order 53 of the Civil Procedure Rules provides for judicial review mechanisms. That if you feel that the decision to charge is not merited, the law provides for a mechanism for challenging that. But you see now, the public expects that this prosecution be expedited, regardless. You get? But in the dock, someone feels this decision is not merited. He will challenge it.
So that you feel the case is being presented and not strong enough. That's what you're saying.
The bottom line, I'm not going to comment on the merits of the cases. I believe if the DP applies the mandate well, justice will be done and will be fought. What I'm saying is this. The complexities insofar as litigation or prosecution of criminal offenses are concerned will necessarily slow down the expected quick results. The instant coffee solution cannot be found in the judicial processes, because in court, the war on graft is just like any other offense, being prosecuted in the judicial manner with all the necessary legal safeguards. Now, on the issue of advocate-client account, that's an ongoing contentious debate. I don't think we can finalize it here, especially when we're addressing Kenyans on the strategies. What I would like to limit myself to is this. Let us not burden the DPP. And I agree with Dorcas. Let us not burden the DPP. Another Kenyans must not have over expectations on the office of the DPP. I've just posed a question. Is it really possible in this country to arrest and arraign the political elite? Even if those, technically yes, but how many times can you bring all Kenyans?
Yeah.
John said, corruption arrives to you.
Okay.
You know, as extortion.
Okay.
You participate in it.
Yeah.
You are giving, the other person receiving. Can you charge all? What I want Kenyans to understand is this: there is a serious breakdown. Okay. We like what is called civic virtue.
All right.
A sense of responsibility.
Okay.
You know, that begins at the ballot.
Okay.
And then pressure in terms of accountability.
Okay, got it. Mashirima.
Vimetupiwa mawakili, lakini kuna swali lingine kuhusiana na ushahidi unaofikishwa mahakamani. Kennedy, simama tafadhali.
Thank you. My name is Kennedy Molo from Nyatike sub-county.
Yes.
Okay, the question that I'm going to raise is going to the office of DPP. The question is on the issue of evidence. Recently, Kenyans received a complaint from the judiciary that the office of DPP is not filing cases that have got strong and adequate evidences. Okay. What is your start on this? Is it that this office is lacking or having incompetency in carrying out its duties?
All right. Dorcas is the office incompetent.
First of all, officers from the office of the DPP serve up to the Court of Appeal. They're the East African Court, even in The Hague. And these officers are very competent officers. As at the time that we make the decision to charge, we are convinced that we have sufficient evidence with a reasonable prospect of conviction and that it is the public interest to take that matter to court. And at the time that we are charging accused persons in court, we disclose and we give them the evidence against them. And at that moment, nobody speaks or says that that evidence is not sufficient. And that is why we go through trial. However, in the course of trial, there are many things that happen. You find that accused persons interfere with witnesses, accused persons interfere with evidence, accused persons interfere with assets which would otherwise be forfeited or confiscated. And it's because of these variables that happen during the pendency of a case that affect the viability of a case within the criminal justice system. But as at the time that we charge an accused person, we are convinced that there is sufficient evidence with a reasonable prospect of conviction that it is in the public interest.
So ideally, what should be done then? Do you think the accused should be held?
There must be mechanisms where there are conditions that they do not interfere with witnesses, because in most cases we have seen witnesses are being corrupted in the first place, witnesses are being threatened, evidence is being interfered with, evidence is disappearing, a lot of assets that are corruptly gotten are now being disposed of, stolen and even hidden such that you cannot get it. And this is, again, Kenyans and accused persons. How do we allow this to happen? The DPP cannot superintend everywhere. It is the responsibility of different arms of the government. We are just doing our mandate according to the Constitution, and it is the responsibility of all of us because we follow the evidence, and it is the citizens who are our witnesses and are the ones who can cooperate with the DPP to make sure that we succeed. But we are doing all that we can and the best that we can.
By different arms, you mean the judiciary?
For example,
because any time when an accused is released on bail, there are usually direct instructions not to interfere with witnesses.
As you said, it's a multi-agency, multifaceted effort. So everybody's in it. We have investigators, we have prosecutors, we have the judiciary, we have probation officers, we have professionals, we have the lawyers. Everybody's in it.
All right. Vincent, is that the same experience from the EACC?
EACC as an investigative agency investigates cases and forward file case files to the DPP. And I want to confirm that the DPP agrees with almost 95% of the issues we recommend. That means the evidence is watertight, the case is there, and they go ahead and prosecute. I think
we don't see any
the challenges that we are seeing are related to what Doctors has just indicated, and also the court process. I think there's a lot that we need to say about court process. We have seen cases where orders have been given to stop EACC from prosecuting cases. So there's a lot that needs to be done to ensure that when a matter moves forward to the courts, that is brought to its logical conclusion, and where there is evidence that these people are duly found guilty and convicted accordingly, because that was going to send a strong message to Kenyans. If all this goes up to the court system and you see acquittals and all these kind of things, it really doesn't send a good message. And that's why I was saying that the sting of corruption is yet to be felt. felt until we see serious convictions based on the very good evidence that we provide. Then a lot is yet to change.
All right, Ashirima.
Sasa hivi nataka tu kuchukua maswali mawili ndio iweze kuwa rahisi kuyajibu. Tuko naye hapa Felista, simama tafadhali.
I'm Felista Mbolonza from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. My question goes to Vincent on preventive measures services. What are the specific preventive measures which are in place to prevent corruption, apart from dealing with corruption after it takes place?
Thank you. Let's now hear from Professor Rachel Gesami.
Okay. Thank you, the panel and all of the colleagues around. My names are Professor Rachel Gesami, and I will start with a comment. I feel that we are all so educated in Kenya that we use very fancy words to describe corruption. But if we had to go to actually define corruption, what is corruption? We have bribery, extortion, cronyism, we have nepotism, parochialism, we have patronage, we have influence peddling, we have graft and embezzlement. Which one are we dealing with? That's one question. The other question I would like to ask, and I will put it to Steve. I would like to say that politicians are a function of Kenyans. We cannot always isolate them and say they are corrupt. So we also know that corruption adversely affects both economic and social growth. What is the three arms of government doing to stop it? The executive has a role, the judiciary has a role, and we also know that the legislative have a role. We must have all the three arms of government working together to be able to stop whatever we call it. I don't know what we call corruption in Kenya anymore, because we are lost somewhere, and the entire growth of the Kenyan society is corrupt.
Okay.
So I want to stop there. Thank you.
So which one are we fighting? Embezzlement, bribery, and all the others that she said.
All right, Vincent, we'll start with you.
Thank you.
What are the specific preventive measures? And then Gidongo will come in the issue of the multifaceted agencies and whether they're working. Do you think they're gel?
Okay.
Yeah. But to start with you.
Okay, thank you, Felistas, for that question. EACC has a mandate to prevent corruption. Mostly it is known only for the investigation aspect. But in preventive services, we carry out systems reviews of public bodies to detect corrupt practices and loopholes that are being used to perpetrate corruption. And we manage to advise these institutions to undertake change and review of systems to plug those loopholes. In fact, I can tell you for a fact, before NYS 1 was brought out, we had made a raft of recommendations to the National Youth Service on what they needed to do to address the problem of corruption, including making the institution an autonomous agency. You see, it has come later, but that is another challenge, that we make these recommendations, but we have no force of law to ensure accounting officers and CEOs of these institutions implement those recommendations. So systems reviews is a very key measure we are using to strengthen systems of accountability and governance in public institutions, especially in counties and national government institutions. The second one is public education. We need to change the mindset of Kenyans away from corruption. I mentioned to you a few minutes ago that over 60% of Kenyans are willing and ready to engage in corruption. That tells you that corruption is a way of life, it's a culture in this country. And a change of narrative to look at corruption as a problem within our hearts as opposed to a problem out there is a key strategy. So we're engaging in public education across all sectors of our economy to ensure that people are equipped with information, they know what to do, and most importantly, to say no to corruption themselves. In that regard, we are working with various sectors. We are working with the public sector itself to train public officers in what we call integrity assurance training, to equip them with the skills to help mainstream corruption prevention. We have also mainstream anti-corruption indicator under the performance contracts of various public bodies. And what we are telling them that you need to set structures that will facilitate corruption prevention in your institution, with the leadership being the CEO of the institutions. But what we have noted is that they abrogate that responsibility to a lower level, and therefore it is not being seen properly that prevention is working. As you are aware, prevention is better than cure, is the most sustainable and longer-term strategy in fighting corruption. And I want Kenyans to support prevention as a key strategy. Thank you.
All right. Gidongo, Prof is raising a very interesting aspect of the executive, legislature, and the judiciary. Who is failing who in this chain, in this fight, in your own assessment?
I think that passing of the ball between these institutions has been there as long as we've been talking about fighting corruption in Kenya. You go to the policemen complain that they do investigations, and when they take it forward, it is not treated properly. You talk to the judiciary, they say the investigators are not giving us a quality product. So the blame game has been going on for a long time. For me, I continue to insist, with all the institutions we have in Kenya now, the level of training and the kind of human capacity they have, it's amongst the best in Africa. We have other African countries coming to Kenya to benchmark on us, one of the most corrupt countries in Africa. They're coming to benchmark here because our institutions are so good. So perhaps we need to accept that the problem is different. We have the institutions, we have the legislation, but and I think Professor raised the issue where she talked about money laundering and different types of corruption. But to the ordinary Mwananchi, ordinary African person, in many of our languages, we don't have the word for corruption. Lakini mwizi ni mwizi. You know, and even in the village, the person who steals a goat is treated very directly in a particular way. And so perhaps for us to also change the way we regard some of those who, and my friend Steve was talking about the ballot box being the place where we elect these thieves. I would question, do we elect them? There are cases where the entire election is stolen. So an elite is able to perpetuate itself, where a small group of thieves from 1960s, the same families, the same individuals are stealing from the same population. So it's as if Kenyans are hostage, you know, to a group of thieves who are holding guns to their head to steal and turning them upside down to drop the coins. And then so we line up every 5 years, tunapiga kura, and we are dedicated, we're good at lining up, but we're not sure what's going to come out the other side. So I would say that we need to take a different perspective from it. We load these institutions, they will not deliver, simply because the foundation on which they are built, the political will that is required for whether it's DPP, EACC, DCI, whoever to be able to prosecute a mandate in a manner that Kenyans can feel confident about, simply isn't there.
All right. Let's take a quick break here on Town Hall Session. We're still at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. When we come back, the audience still have several questions for the panelists here, and your views are also welcome to 22422. Hashtag Monday Report. As usual, you can tweet at Trevor Mbija, at Mashiri Makapombe, at Waiga Mwaura. We'll sample some of the views as well as from the live audience. We'll be back in